So if obviously this morning we spent a bit of time talking about our own maybe personal definitions of inclusion, and that's probably come from experience, but might have come from some of your reading as well. These are some definitions of inclusion that we've included on the Pebble Pad as well. These aren't the only definitions. There are many definitions out there. You might see that some of your key principles are coming out there. You might see some differences, but these are just the three examples that we've given you at the moment. I'm not going to read these out, but just whilst you're reading these definitions, I just want to talk about maybe some key factors driving forward inclusion. On your Pebble Pad on Course Round 1, you should have a link to a journal article by Ainscough in 2020. And when I was reading this journal article, some of the key factors that stuck out to me, I just thought it would be really helpful to just talk about a little bit more. So there are four key factors that Ainscough sort of outlines. And the first one is inclusion is the key principle. And having it be the key principle of sort of practice, it comes from having really open and honest discussions in settings, really key questions like, what is it that inclusion means for us? What does inclusion look like for us as a setting? What is our agreed definition together as a whole team that we're going to really drive forward for our learners, and being on that same journey together. So a lot of our discussion today has been about attitudes and different attitudes and how we all need to be on the same page in a setting for that continuity for the child, but also to support each other and challenge each other on that journey to inclusion as well. And then tying in with that is the identification of barriers. So those conversations around what are the barriers that we're facing, and we've talked about some just now. What are some of those barriers we're facing, and how can we overcome those to make sure that, we're giving the learners everything that they need in order to achieve their individual goals. But it might be when you identify a barrier that actually who can we work with as well? Because it might be that, you need to take the inclusion team a little bit wider. What other sort of multi-agencies can we work with? What other bodies, people can we work with to make sure that we're driving forward and identifying those barriers? It ties in really nicely into that like community involvement. So how can we extend these inclusive practices wider? Who is involved and what is the role that they play? And, who is in charge of what almost, so that everybody has that shared responsibility of what they can do to put those stepping stones in place for the learners. And then Ainscough also mentions and discusses sort of that use of evidence. So collecting data on things that really matter. So measuring what we value. So how are you measuring the impact of inclusive practice or inclusivity? How are you measuring it, and what is the data telling you, and then what are you doing as a result of that? So that sort of principle ties in really nicely to the reflective models we were talking about this morning, almost that cyclical cycle. What have we found out? What is the impact? What are our next steps here? Because we talked this morning that it's different cohort to cohort, it's different day to day, it's different year on year, and that journey of inclusivity is never really fully realized, I suppose, because you're constantly learning. There's always something more that you can learn and adapt depending on the learners that you have in front of you at any one time. So collecting data, purposeful data, to really unpick and inform then your practice moving forward as well. Having that data as well also really opens up conversations and discussions around what are some things we're doing really well and that are clearly working, and then also challenging each other a little bit as well. What isn't working and what do we need to do to move forward? And then I think it then goes back into those other principles I just mentioned, going back to if something's not going well and we need to adapt and we need to find out more, community involvement, professional learning, identification of barriers, and then looking at that inclusion definition as a setting then as well. So Ainscough's article is on Pebble Pad, and it's really, really helpful in terms of unpicking those principles. So, if you get a chance to go back in and have a look, I would really recommend. And then if we think of our situation in Wales, so the Welsh context, our curriculum in Wales, the purpose and the goal of curriculum for Wales is right there, those four purposes. So we want our learners to be ambitious, enterprising, ethical, healthy, confident individuals. We want all of those things. And how do we sort of develop our inclusive classroom practice in sort of connection and in cohesion with that? So I've picked up this quote that I think highlights our position really as teachers at the moment. So obviously the main goal of Curriculum for Wales is to raise the aspiration for learners, making sure learners have those really enriching opportunities to develop. And the way in which it's been sort of outlined and delivered is that teachers and schools now have more autonomy and agency to sort of create opportunities that can really support learners and drive forward that inclusive agenda. So being able to just design your curriculum, being able to adapt in the moment, create specific instances and circumstances allows everybody, learners, children, young people who are in front of you, to have access to those opportunities and to feel that sense of belonging, because that sense of belonging is something that came up a lot this morning. It's obviously really important to us on the call here because it keeps cropping up. So we're teaching at a time where we do have that agency to make those adaptations, to change, and to really create and plan authentic opportunities that we know our learners are interested in and that is really important for each one. Depending on their individual goals, depending on their individual aims, we can tailor those opportunities so that we are putting those stepping stones in place and removing those barriers for the learners as well. We have also spoke about benefits and challenges. So some of the benefits that we've spoken about is, again, that improved well-being, that sense of belonging, feeling included, and developing really individual opportunities and valuing that each individual learner has their own goal, has their own journey, and what we can do to help them get there. So we've talked about the challenges a lot, and some of the challenges that have come up in our conversations just now were things like resources. We've talked about learning environments, and I think somebody mentioned funding earlier as well. But I'm just going to pick out one or two of these. So if we look at the bottom one here of attitudes, that really encapsulates everything we've spoken about this morning. So, what are our attitudes towards inclusion? And as individual practitioners, what are our goals? And then taking that wider, we have to be on the same page. So you've spoke so much about this today, which has been really, really interesting. We all have to have the same ideas of how we can drive forward that inclusive practice. It has to be classroom-wide. If you're a classroom team, everybody has to be on the same page there so that the learners are having those key opportunities and that consistency. But wider in the school as well, or the setting that you're working in, we have to make sure that we've all got those core principles and we all understand what matters and what the role is that we play in that to really drive that vision forward. If we don't have the same attitudes, we saw different perceptions, that model just now. If we don't have the same attitudes or we have different ideas, it is going to be fragmented, isn't it? It isn't going to be consistent. And that's where the differences in sort of opportunities can arise then. So we do really have to support each other and challenge each other on that as well. Professional development is a really key one. I don't have to talk to you guys about professional development. You're all embarking on this journey with us on the National MA, so you know how important that professional development is. But almost having that drive to want to professionally develop. And I think as teachers, we don't have the answers all of the time, and we're not meant to have the answers all of the time. So it's about thinking, okay, who can I work with, or what training do I need to sort of boost my own confidence and make sure that I'm, giving the resources, adapting, whatever you need to do for the learners. So again, it's having that appetite, I think, for that professional development and almost what I would call that professional itch to want to learn more, to want to find out more, to want to adapt your own practice and differentiate it, whatever you're doing, to make sure that the learners have those opportunities. And I think that ties in really closely with that teacher preparation as well. And when I think of that as a phrase, I think about the comment we had this morning about differing from cohort to cohort. So almost being prepared that inclusion journey is that in itself, it's a journey and it's never ending. So being prepared to adapt, being prepared that actually it could change from day to day or week to week, and working together then with others. Because if we aren't prepared, if we haven't got that appetite for sort of developing, I'm not sure how far that inclusion journey can really go. This is also from Ainscough. So this is the same journal article I was talking about just now, and I've lifted it directly from there because I think it really encapsulates everything we've spoken about so far. So if we think about sort of inclusion being in the middle there, And if you look at the top point here, really talking about learning and teaching, unpicking what's working really well, what does the individual child or young person need, and what, really reflecting on our own teaching practices as well. You'd then almost go down here to further developing. So depending on what your child or your young person is telling you, you'll develop that inclusive practice. It might be that at this top point here as well, you embarked upon some professional development, you sought some advice, you collaborated to develop those inclusive practices even further. And then when I look at this point here, it makes me think about that data point again. What's working? What isn't working? And where do we move on from here? And again, it's almost like a cyclical journey, which again ties in really well to what we're asking you to do, to reflect upon those inclusive practices and use those reflective models. So I just thought that was a really helpful diagram to really highlight everything that we've spoken about so far in terms of that collaboration and that reflection. And if we think about how do we know when inclusivity is successful or on the route to being successful, your values as a setting don't change, but how you operate day to day does, because you're adapting to meet the needs of the learner. So that definition of inclusion, that idea of inclusion maybe doesn't change because you've talked about it, you've delivered it together. But actually what that looks like on a day-to-day does change depending on who's in front of you at any one time and depending on the journey of each individual learner as well. It's a never-ending process and there's a willingness to learn. So there's that almost professional itch to think, okay, that didn't go so well today. What can I do differently next time? Or even reflect on a whole year. This is where we've come. This is how far we've come. How do we get to the next step now? Clear focus on removing barriers. So again, linking in with our social model, linking in with the Ainsco's highlight of those principles, really thinking about what are the barriers that we can see and what can we do to remove those for our learners? What are the steps that we can put in place? What is the training we can put in place to remove them? Really valuing the participation of everyone and the achievement of everyone. Every child and young person in our settings will have different goals, will have different pathways to achieving something, and really valuing that those journeys are individual and, every journey really does matter. Processes are evaluated. So again, that data, collecting data that is really meaningful. So how have we done with this particular process or this strategy? What do we need to do differently? What's worked well that we can really build on? And maybe who do we need to collaborate with as well to take it even further? And then a focus then on groups or maybe individuals who are at risk of being excluded. So almost having that awareness and that preparation of who could be excluded and what we need to do to develop that sense of belonging in our settings. So the last activity that I'm going to ask you to do is to think about the factors that really underpin an inclusive classroom. So we've talked about some already, and you might be sitting there thinking, well, we've got different factors in my set, and I've thought about something else, and that's great because I think we'll all have different perspectives and experiences with this. So what are the factors that you think really underpin an inclusive classroom, and what do you think are the benefits of an inclusive classroom? So really building on that previous Padlet discussion. What I'll do is I'll stop sharing and recording just a second. I'll pop the Padlet link into your breakout rooms and I'll copy and paste these questions as well, just so you've got them ticking along to keep you going. And then we'll do the same, pull you back, and we'll have a little unpicking and discussion. And then I think we'll probably be looking to close the session then just because of time. So I'll stop sharing. I will stop recording and